Ladies and gentlemen, dear Armin, dear Fulvio, dear Wilfried, dear Napoleone, I heard and saw for the first time the name Carlo Mollino when a friend of mine, choreographer Carol Armitage, and her partner, artist David Sally, created at the American Ballet Theatre in the spring of 1986 the piece, the dance piece, The Mollino Room. 2 years before, in 1984, the market and influential art dealers had suddenly, not really discovered, but suddenly jumped on the market and started to buy and sell Mollino for lots and lots of money. One of these art dealers, but he says that he's much more a collector, and I really do believe that, is of course Bruno Bischofsberger. And one of the artists of Bruno Bischofsberger, was and is, of course, David Sally. And that's how David Sally discovered Mollino. And indeed, both Bruno Bischofsberger and David Sally are still avid collectors of good design. But back to the Mollino Room. It was fascinating to read the legendary dance critic of the New York Times, Anna Kisselgoff, who wrote a review, a critique of the dance piece, The Mollino Room, in the New York Times on April 12, 1986. And she wrote the following words about the set, about the backdrop, about the part of David Sally, which was Mollino, or was supposed to be Mollino, one of the many interpretations of Mollino. She wrote, "This ballet was named after Carlo Mollino, an architect whose deliberate emphasis on dubious taste, bad taste, makes him a precursor of certain contemporary design trends." Now, if you write that in a catalog of Quittenbaum, nobody will understand you. Bad taste, certain contemporary design trends. That's how the dance world reviewed Carlo Mollino. And indeed, when you read the newspapers of the last weeks, when you read the Austrian newspapers, but also some German newspapers talking about the show at the Kunst, which Fulvio and Napoleone curated for Gerald Matt, and when you read some of the words about the show which Wilfried, Kühn and Armin Linke curated here, then it's still, Mollino is still up for grabs. He is a pornographer, he is a car racer, he is the perfect ski teacher, he does also a little bit of architecture. Many, many things are still there, set in the world without any precision. Luckily, things got better. And things got better thanks to the dedication of scholars, thanks to the dedication of institutions, thanks to the dedication also of many contemporary artists who love Carlo Mollino. Thanks to the dedication of the architects Marco Roghero and Giovanni Brino, and it is Brino who introduced really to the world of Carlo Mollino with his book in 1985, Architecture as Autobiography, and that's a very important title for the discussion tonight, Architecture as Autobiography. It's thanks to the dedication of these Torinese architects that Mollino's documents were safeguarded after his death, because he died in 1973 at the age of 68, and thanks to both architects, the archives of Mollino, at least a major part of the archives of Mollino, came to the library of the Polytechnic University in Torino. And the Polytech University of Torino, just like Milano, has a very important architectural department. And still in the archives, people are working around Mollino, and thanks to them, thanks to Sergio Pace, thanks to Elena Tamagno, thanks to Laura Milan, we can show all these wonderful documents from the archives. Carlo Mollino died without heirs, but there were some people who really continued to dedicate their life and their own fascinations and obsessions to the world of Mollino. And two of them we have here tonight, and that's of course Fulvio Ferrari and his son, philosopher Napoleone Ferrari. And the interest of Fulvio goes way back, also 70s, and he really started to concentrate, I think, on Mollino in 1984, so to speak. The dates 1984 and 1986 are crucial. You will start to understand later. It's kind of interesting. In 1999, these two gentlemen, they started what has now become the very popular Museo Casa Mollino in Turin, in Torino. And the story of the Casa Mollino you will find in our book, our catalog, and you also will find in the exhibition upstairs. Because of course we have a catalog, and there is, beyond the catalog we have also the special issue of Domus, which you have to buy, which is dedicated to Carlo Mollino. Fulvio and Napoleone themselves, they published many books. I think by now you have published 7 or 8.
12.
12 already, my goodness, it grows by the day. Some of them are absolutely crucial. They're fantastic. They're out of print. You cannot buy them anymore. You can buy them at Walter Koenig as antiquarisch, but they're fantastic. And one of their books, Carlo Mollino, Arabesque, became immediately a bestseller. And there is, of course, the furniture book published by Faden with the two gentlemen, which is still available and which is an absolute must. Again, in the middle of the 80s, at the beginning of the second half of the 80s, there was another generation, and to that generation belonged the other gentleman, and that's Wilfried Kühn, the architect, and Armin Linke. They both studied architecture at the Polytechnic University of Milano, and they were immediately fascinated, obsessed, and interested in the architectural ideas of Mollino, because for them the architectural ideas of Mollino offered valuable alternatives to the neo-rationalism. The neo-rationalism, which was of course then the word of the day in terms of architecture. Think about the second half of the 80s. Armin Linke stopped after I think a year and a half. He stopped doing architecture and he continued to do photography. And Wilfried Kühn, together with his office, Kühn Malvezzi of Berlin, he immediately started to make name and fame as an architect himself, and also somebody who was doing fantastic exhibition architecture and displays of architecture. And in the context of display, they started to work together, they started to teach together at the Hochschule für Gestaltung in Karlsruhe. They found themselves back, a famous photographer, a young famous architect, and they decided to work with the students also on a Carlo Mollino project. And we brought forces together in the Haus der Kunst and the Hochschule für Gestaltung. Armin Linke and Wilfried Kühn, helped enormously by the archives, helped enormously by Fulvio Napoleone Ferrari. We decided to make this project together. Interestingly enough, there are still in the world, when you think of the world of Mollino, there are still so many different interpretations and reflections. There are even completely different schools of thought. One can even speak about fractions. One considers Mollino like this, the other fraction or school considers Mollino like that. And that's what we're going to discuss tonight. Because what I find very interesting, Wilfried, Armin, Napoleone and Fulvio, is that Fulvio Napoleone, also in the books and in the Casa Mollino, they stress the aspect of autobiography. And I remember when I spoke to Fulvio in the past days, he said, I like enormously the approach towards architecture, which is the approach of Wilfried and Armin. They are going themselves, Napoleone and Fulvio, going to publish a book about the architecture of Mollino. Still, Fulvio said, I lack the aspect of autobiography. And I would like to discuss and to start a discussion with this aspect. Fulvio, can you reiterate, can you explain what you meant with that sentence to me? I lack in this exhibition the aspect of autobiography.
Yes, I think that everybody is fascinated by Mollino, because Mollino was a man totally free. So his life is really life of a man that explored everything in the world. So usually people are dividing the interest of Mollino in ski, in architecture, in racing car, in photography, and so on. But at the end, what I like very much is that Mollino was able to touch everything and was able to give a very depth connaissance or interpretation of the argument. So what it is very interesting is that through Mollino you can have a kind of computer. He is the computer, and you can develop your connaissance of the world through this fantastic genius that was able to understand immediately the meaning of, I don't know, everything. So, for example, today we saw a Gothic palace here in Munich, and immediately I remind that Mollino wrote something on this kind of architecture, and all the dragoons or the animals that are composing the facade of the building are reused by Mollino in a very modern way, mixing Gothic architecture with straight modern architecture, but also in different ways, because after he was photographing his architecture, he was retouching the photo, so he's giving always a point of view that nobody could imagine.
So you imagine him as a god?
Excuse me?
You consider Carlo Mollino as a god?
Non capisco la parola garda.
Un dio.
Un dio. For sure, Mollino was born with something different from everybody of us, because as everybody knows, Mollino was able to draw with both hands, 2 pencils, in meantime 2 different projects. And,
so a half-god, un mezzodio, no?
Mezzodio. And when he was 28 years old, he described his ability, his capacity to see in his brain the building that he was projecting, and he was able to see this hologram of the building, to rotate the building in his brain and to go inside to see if the walls were constructed exactly where he projected them. So it's the computer program that today every architect is using, but this was 1932 and he was 28 years old. So this means something, I think.
So, okay, you both, Fulvio, Napoleone, you stress in your work, also in the Casa Mollino, the aspect of autobiography. You consider Carlo Mollino as a genial figure, as a very competent 360-degree man. That's your own words.
Exactly.
You lack this aspect in the exhibition?
In the exhibition, the focus is much more on the architecture of Mollino, and also something that is lost in the exhibition, but was not possible to have it, is that obviously the furniture are the most easy.
The furniture.
The furniture,
yes.
But the complexity of Mollino is that he's always inventing his world for his clients. So the furniture that you will see are now, today, lost in the space. And these furniture were made for a composition. So if you look to the armchair, the green one with the armrest in wood, sculpted, very beautiful, this armchair was conceived for the Marquis Orengo. So the house of the Marquis Orengo was a very luxurious house, very cultivated, with a lot of dark green, little tiles in red glass, brass, fantastic. And if you will go and you will see this armchair in front of you, you will see that the armchair is the Marquis Orengo, because the hairs of the armchair are fantastic. The proportion of the armchair is, again, looks too low. It is very comfortable, we know, because we restored the armchair, so we could sit in her. And this means that You have to see, if you want to understand the furnitures of Mollino, the furniture in his place in which they was composing this world. That's it.
Okay. Wilfried, you were the one who said to me at the very beginning of our communal project, we should really try to make an exhibition where the autobiographical aspect is not blinding us, is not putting everything else away. What did you mean by that? Because you have chosen together with Armin, like a partisan, for a completely other road, correct?
Well, yes. I mean, the question is, can you speak about religion without being a believer or without believing in God? I mean, the question is, can we also use an exhibition as a tool to understand things that we might not understand beforehand, and maybe use it as a critical tool? Since we want to arrive at a re-evaluation of Mollino in the context of the arts, in the context of architecture, and perhaps the biography, the way it has been written now for the last 20 years or 30 years, also created its own mythology. So biography becomes very soon a kind of fixed image, cliché, stereotype, and so on. And we always had the feeling that it would need a whole other research in terms of archival research, biographical research, critical research, to really also talk to witnesses and people from the time, and which is already very difficult to do. To really get to another point and see biography here as something that would unearth and somehow reveal whole different strata, archaeological strata, so to speak, of his life. Because that's also sure not much is known about him, because even if you put him on this kind of godlike pedestal, it's not really also clear what has happened in his biography in every detail, because he has also been very secretive about things. And I like very much the passage in Carlo Ramos' interview when she says that, she repeats it 3 or 4 times, that he used to use camouflage. You know, camouflage was his way to find a kind of protection in order to actually live certain things. And now, if we look at maybe the camouflage and not really at what actually happened behind. So, in order to not just describe the camouflage, we have to unearth really something more if we want to go into biography. Now, we took a different path here because we thought that it could be interesting also to look at the works in a different context and use the exhibition, which is, if you want a white cube exhibition, to use it in order to show these works in a totally different, not historical, not contextual in terms of history environment. That means we would not reconstruct the green tiles, we would not try to elude anything of the historical rooms or spaces, but we would rather decontextualize these furniture pieces and put them in a white cube space and see what happens if they start interacting and dialoguing between each other, because they are from different interiors, they're from very different commissions. And I think it's rather interesting, and to me also very, very rewarding, seeing them now in one space put together like in a little bit in an artificial situation. Now, this is of course the freedom also of making an exhibition, that you put the question a different way. And the other thing is that we wanted to have the dialogue between the projects. In order to have the dialogue between the projects, we renounced any chronology through the exhibition, and we also renounced any work like groups, like we would not make typologies like Alpine or living or private or public or things like that are used usually to make history, to write history. Right. But we have put things together, and we have put the photography together with the architecture and so on. Yeah, so it's really the opposite of typology, it's the opposite of division and classification, and it's the opposite of chronology.
And the opposite of iconoclass, of iconography,
absolutely,
so to speak.
And that way we could actually make a choice, and the choice was to have 5 themes, which guided us through the whole research. And the 5 themes were developed together with our students at the university at the beginning, and then developed out of them. And the 5 themes which were condensed and are really choreographies, montage, display, publications, and appropriations. And I think that these strategies, as project strategies, as design strategies, are very interesting in terms of the relation between Mollino architect and Mollino photographer and Mollino artist. And here we have a great vicinity to contemporary artistic practice, or 20th century practice in general. And we think that also through the contribution of the contemporary artists, we could actually create a moment of updating and actualization.
Napoleone, because we have a very interesting debate already going on, no? Two different interpretations, not enough autobiography, and be aware of too much autobiography. What would you like to say about Fulvio's comment and about Wilfried's comment? Do you present a third way?
Maybe I am a little bit in between of the two.
Okay, what is the third way?
If we can say it that way. Yes. I think it's very important, as Wilfried was saying, the research work, and this particularly for Mollino, since there was always this very, strange approach, or very often are stressed some strange aspect of Mollino's work. And this is also what we try to do with some of our books, like the Phaidon, or also the photography, putting together the precise information, the dates, and all what is connected with the work. I think what Fulvio is interested in, and I am, and it's the title that you read about Giovanni Brino book of 1985. The title is coming from Bruno Zevi. It's him that wrote in an article when Mollino died, saying architecture as an autobiography.
Architecture as autobiography.
Yes,
that's
exactly.
the third way then.
Speaking of Mollino. Because at the end we feel that Mollino's individual particularity in the modern architecture, because Mollino was a very modern architect. His first building is 1933. So he was really in the rationalist moment, and but he himself tried to find his own way, which is very autobiographical in the sense that he brought himself, his person, his character inside the project to make functionalism a little bit different.
Mm-hmm. Armin, you show many photographs in the exhibition and also here, and just like John Cage and Merce Cunningham used to say, I already saw that sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. In a sense, there is an interesting collision between your comments and the images, which you don't see. Too bad, but it's very interesting for the public. Oh, you see it over there. Armin, your photographs of Mollino, your interest in general for photographing representational architectures, your photographs of the architecture of Mollino sometimes look very harsh. Do you want to stress the normalcy of Mollino? Do you want to make in your own photographs anti-Mollino photographs in order to let the architecture speak for itself? I mean, you refuse in your photographs of Mollino mise en scène. Huh? It's very dry. It's very clear. It's clear cut. Is your photography, being present as it is in the book and in the exhibition, a critique on the fact that we often overdo the geniality of Mollino, or is it something else?
Well, I don't think that I have to add on some spectacularization in photographing the work of Mollino, because the work of Mollino has already a kind of theatrical quality and also a sculptural quality, and in a certain way, I try to be detached, but so that certain things can come out of the photograph. For example, that the architecture has this cultural value, and in a certain way activates the landscape in which it is put. So the quality of this architecture is as an artwork that we get cautions about the context, and I think this is one of quality of art, that we, if you move inside the Teatro Regio, you
which is the last project of his life, which is the theater.
Yes, with the Camera di Commercio. is that you have these different layers and kind of different stages that interact together, and so you as public look the other public, and you're performing a choreography for the others, and you're part of a big choreographic machine in which you get aware of your body moving into the space. And this is again a kind of performative quality that the architecture activates. And then a lot of photographers look at some details into the architecture, and where I see, photographing is like finding little sculptures or little details that in a certain way need more attention. And the photography has this quality of freeze, something that when you go through a space, sometimes you are not aware. So I try to look at this. Of course, there is sometimes I choose to activate some criticality. For example, the picture done on the cover of our catalog, Lago Nero. We went first time with Kurt Forster at Wilfried in December when there was ski season. So I decided to come back. When was it? In May, when the ski season was over. There was still snow. So for me, it was important that you had this mid-season where the architecture was in the landscape. You still saw the Schneekanonen. How do you say? Snow cannons. You still saw the advertising of tourism, actually produced by Fondazione San Ettore Arbodengo. So the sculpture near Lago Nero produced by Paola Pivi now is the advertising for tourism. So, now these elements were present. So it was important for me to come back and add this other level. So in this picture now there is also a little thinking about what is art production now, because in the photograph you see already another artist, how the work of another artist was transformed by tourism industry, or you see the infrastructure of tourism industry of nowadays that is near the architecture of Mollino.
So you're also a little bit irritated when the press covers the Mollino exhibitions over with the same pictures of Mollino as a racer, car racer, as a ski man of brilliance, which is a mise-en-scène. You also mind all these Polaroids, which are always in the press. You also probably, do you mind Jürgen Teller, his pictures in Casa Mollino, Jeff Burton's pictures in Casa Mollino? That's not the kind of photography you want.
No, not at all. I saw the pictures of Jürgen Teller, and actually
in the Old 32 magazine.
And I went vacation in Hydra in Greece, and there was a gallery that showed the Jürgen Teller photos, and actually it were really beautiful to see as an original print outside the fashion system of the magazine, which maybe is kind of pushing them in a corner so that you read them only in the context of the magazine, and seeing them then as an original, actually in a context that was completely absurd. Going in Greece on an island shows that this quality of the multiple reading that is possible of the work of Mollino. And I think this is actually what is strong about the work of Mollino, that it has incredible amounts of reading levels. What is important that the work is presented giving the possibility of openness, so that everybody can project and read what is possible. In a certain way, maybe what we tried also with the students in the show is to present the work almost as a laboratory where the public can confront different strategies and then discover by himself and confront by himself, like putting experiment. What happens if I put this with this what comes out for me as a public.
Thank you. You made your point, and I think it's very clear where we stand. And I think it's also clear that maybe tonight we have to find this third way, architecture as autobiography. Let's start. Torino. What is the importance of Torino? What makes Torino city of Tarnung, city of camouflage? What makes Torino so important for Mollino? But strangely enough, Mollino does not seem so important for Torino. Fulvio, what is Torino? What is Torino? What is it?
Torino is a quite clever city because it's outside of Italy, almost. People living in Milano said that, okay, they know that we are out of Italy. So,
it's like Munich.
So, Torino developed his own character and his own fresh ideas. And the most important is that the king of Torino was able to arrange the unity of Italy. So Italy was born from Torino. And if you will come in Torino in these days, you will see that Torino is the only city in Italy that has, because it's 150 years that Italy is created, and you will see a city full of flags. It's fantastic. And these flags, it's people, ordinary people that put the flags outside of the windows. So this means that still Torino has a strong character, but everybody is composing this character of the city. And to live in Torino and to do something in Torino is more difficult than to do the same in Milano. Because Torino, as I said, it's apart, so everything looks like made in Milano, but the Italian fashion was born in Torino, the Italian radio was born in Torino, the first rational building with all the furniture inside was built in Torino. Domus dedicated one entire issue to this building, Palazzo Gualino. So many inventions were made in Torino. I don't remember.
So is Mollino then a typical, or his work and his thinking, a typical expression of that vibrant city?
Yes, for sure the industry of Torino created a base to understand and to be in this technological avant-garde. But also the city is constructed with very strong program. So Torino, it's a metaphysical city, and you have to remind that the Chirico painting, Metaphysica, is born between Torino and Ferrara. And also the philosopher Nietzsche said that he was possible only in Torino. This was also something quite strong. So still we have a lot of things that are happening in Torino, like Arte Povera, that is born in Torino. Every artist of the Arte Povera is coming out from Torino. So still it's a city that is inventing something that is totally out of fashion, totally new, so not recognized, and at a point when this thing is gone in Milano, became immediately recognized, and everybody knows what was happening before in Torino.
Okay, so Mollino comes from that vibrance. He's an example. And
yes, because he was in this field of complexity of many different...
I noticed that, Armin, when you hear these words by Fulvio, that you're quite skeptical about that.
No, on the contrary, no.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay. Oh, when you look skeptical, you agree.
No, yes.
Okay, good. I mean,
that's
a nice way to express yourself.
When we went with the students to Torino, the first thing we saw was not architecture of Mollino, but the Mole Antoniana. So, yeah, that is
that is again something. It's a masterpiece of this engineer Antonelli that was totally crazy, and they commissioned a synagogue to Antonelli, and he built the highest building in bricks in the world. So he was able also to find the money to make this work, because at the point the Jewish refused the project of Antonelli. So there is also from this side that is technological and visionary, a very strong character in the city of Torino. And the father of Mollino was a very important engineer. And Mollino was trained by his father like an engineer. Mollino is thinking and working like an engineer. When you see the chairs in the exhibition with this very tiny back, you can't believe how comfortable is the chair. It's a kind of Zen level. The chair is the man, and Mollino is the chair. If you look to these furniture, you have the impression that the furniture it's a person. But
Yet, Wilfried, Torino was not really interested in Mollino.
I don't know. He had his followers. It's not that he was totally isolated. I think that there was there were also his so to speak, his disciples actually, and I think there is a group of people, of architects who really derived from him a whole lot. If you think of that movement around in the 50s, where regionalism, quote unquote, in a way, was re-entering the debate, the architectural debate internationally, with the famous debate between the Smithsons and the Italians, or the English and the Italians at the Otterlo meeting of CIAM, and once Le Corbusier left the scene, and then this young next generation started debating, should there be traditional forms in contemporary architecture or not? And the English Smithsons, above all, with their, and Aldo van Eyck from Holland, the Protestant ideas of still modern, strong modernism, were firmly against it. And the Italians, with Giancarlo De Carlo and Rogers and so on, with Torre Velasca, for instance, in Milan, advocated all of a sudden that you could use pitched roofs and so on. That was in the late 50s, and this would not have been possible without something happening before. And one of the most famous buildings of that moment in Turin was La Bottega d'Erasmo, which is a building not far away from the Molo Antoniana. It was built by a direct student of and assistant and so on of Mollino, Gabetti and Isola. And Gabetti and Isola actually were kind of the young rebels at that point. But what they do, if you really look at the architecture of the time, they take a lot from what Mollino has developed already in the 30s as a way of thinking on how to meld tradition with modernism. So in a way, I think that there is a school. There is actually a school, but it's not a declared one. And even the name, there was this moment of neo-liberty, it was called. And liberty is the Italian word, although it's a Lent word, is the Italian word for Jugendstil, for Art Nouveau. So the neo-liberty would I think, which also people like Gaiolenti and Gregotti, now to make the history complete, from Milan were involved in at the moment, would not have been possible without the liberty kind of neo-liberty in Mollino that we see already in the 30s. We think, if you look, when you enter the exhibition, this metal rod, that's the wardrobe of Italo Cremona, is called Drago con fiore liberty. And
that's the first piece, the real first piece you see upstairs. Right?
And yes, the very first piece, this copper snake, so to speak. And if you look then at Minotaur, the news magazine, the magazine of the surrealists in Paris, and at the photographic articles with photos by Brassai, published by Dali and the likes, you see these architectures of Guimard and so on, and Gaudi, that look exactly like that. So you see also, and we know that Mollino was influenced by that. So here we have a very biographical element, as a matter of fact. But it's an artistic biographical element because he has not known the surrealists. He did not travel to Paris. He just consumed the magazines. He was very educated through reading and publications, and he loved publications. He also created publications. So I think that this is already a very important aspect. He did not travel much, but he read news magazines or surrealist magazines. Through that, he got this whole thing. He also didn't travel much abroad in the first phase, so much also, you saw the pictures before where he is seemingly flying over New York, and this is of course a collage that he made.
It's a fake.
Or fake, or he took pictures of himself in front of a wallpaper with the New York cityscape. So it was like virtual traveling, and it's the whole opposite of what Armin is doing when he's actually traveling as a photographer everywhere, trying to catch the object. So it's the exact opposite of that photography that Armin is doing. His photography, and that's our point also in the exhibition, is a form of post-production that he could actually do in Turin. He could actually stay at home in his darkroom, so to speak, and do whatever he liked, creating the imagery of travel, the imagery of distance and so on. And maybe this is also interesting because it works again with the magazines and with the distribution, with the circulation of images. And there we catch a Mollino that we are interested in. This whole idea of publications, and you know that this is something we very much put forward here in the exhibition as a thesis also.
Torino, second aspect, I think, of architecture as autobiography is another aspect of Torino. When one speaks about Torino, we speak indeed about the vibrancy, the city underneath at the beginning of the Alps. We speak about and think about industry, but it's also a very important city in terms of Italian political turmoil. Very different from the center, very different from the south. Napoleone, I read in an interview somewhere that Mollino was kind of apolitical. Was he interested in politics? I mean, how did he go through the Second World War? What was his point of view in terms of fascism? Was his complete alternative lifestyle a kind of critique of fascism? What are the politics of Mollino in the politics of Torino?
This is again typical of Mollino, that was very conducted a very individual life, and you will never find in any letters, any documents, any reference to fascism earlier, or maybe to communism later, if we want to arrive to the 60s, to movement. He was professor at the university when there were the late 60s, the movement which are left, let's say. There are letters exchanged with Italo Cremona, was his best friend and artist. Written during the war. Cremona was in Venice, he was a soldier, and there is no one word about the war.
Nothing.
Nothing. It seems they are totally living in a different world. And so Mollino made some buildings in the 30s, which were always public commissions, so they were fascist in the sense that it was a public commission, so they had to be fascist. But yes, there was no real interest by Mollino in politics.
So he took a distance, Fulvio.
Yes, also you have to consider that some furniture that you will see in the exhibition are done by Mollino in 44, exactly in the years 44, 45, in which Torino, that is a Fiat company making, war instruments, was very seriously bombed. And so with a fantastic fair play, Mollino was designing and realizing things that are today impossible to understand how complex it was. A client of Mollino told us that to make a little statue by Mastroianni that is composing a furniture designed by Mollino during the war, this was it was almost impossible to find the material. So this also means that Mollino was really in his world, and what was happening around.
See, this is one thing that for Mollino really art or architecture is one thing, and this is separated really from political problems. Art is art, and which is good and bad, because the bad part is that Mollino never really had a social commitment, with like functionalism, housing for people and cheap objects, industrial production, all these you almost never find. Almost, because there are some projects of Mollino in this sense. The good part is that you never have political or ideological problems with Mollino. The thing is what it is, and it's art, it's independent, and has nothing to do with ideologies.
Interesting, because directly after the war he is commissioned to make a monument for partisans. How come that then, with Mastroianni,
yes.
Who is related to Marcello Mastroianni, no?
He's the uncle.
He's the uncle.
See, but again, there is a text.
Yeah, but why? Why he's accepting to make this monument?
Why they accept him to make the monument?
Why do I accept him to make a monument? It's a very good, counter question.
I think it was through Mastroianni that I don't know really exactly because I never really studied this specific commission. So again, speaking of research and precise dates, yes, information, one maybe should know exactly. Mollino was a friend of Mastroianni, was a friend with many artists, especially in the 30s, like Italo Cremona, Carlo Levi.
Is that also the reason why the Arte Povera artists, Pennone, Mario, Marisa Merz, Michelangelo Pistoletto, I mean, when I asked them, when Mario was still alive, Mollino, not interested.
Not interested.
Not interested. He was a dandy. He was a salon artist.
Yes, because they can't understand Mollino. They can't know who is really behind the camouflage. And Mollino was not at all interested in be recognized during his life. Mollino was seriously working in his life for a project that is the project of his life. And this also is astonishing because Mollino looks like a man that knew why he was on the world. And he wrote his autobiography before his life. He wrote his autobiography when he was 28 years old in form of a romance, and his life will be, has been exactly like he wrote when he was 28. So this is unbelievable. And these people that know only this exterior aspect of Mollino can't understand nothing, because Mollino spent his life really trying to leave everybody out of his life. So when Carlo Rama is saying that if you ask
Rama is saying that at the beginning of the exhibition on the video monitor?
Exactly. She is saying, if you ask to Mollino something concerning mountains, he will start speaking, I don't know, about sea. If you ask about a furniture, he will start to speak about women, and so on. And this was because Mollino don't want to speak.
Do you agree with that, Armin? Because yesterday and the day before yesterday in your comments, you have been, when you photographed the Teatro Regio, when you filmed the Teatro Regio, you show people, you show how people use the inside and the outside of the Teatro Regio. And also Mollino was very interested, I think, in environmental problems like traffic infrastructure, in trying to cross over this whole idea of the city and the mountain. I mean, there were certain aspects, I think, where he's going outside his own private world, Armin, or not?
Well, I can speak on the Teatro Regio, and first of all, I think it's the opera theater that has the most of abbonamenti, of abonnement. So I think it's a very important piece of architecture for the identity of the city, and that I mean, there is also a very good social program for children in the morning. So you have really a lot of different kind of publics that use, but this is also possible because there are different plazas inside the building. There is the plaza outside of that is really covers the theater. You don't see the theater from outside; you just see the Baroque facade. Then there is an inside plaza that is used by skateboarders, and the theater is doing everything possible to stop them, because under the skateboard plaza there is a little theater. Then you have the main hall and different levels. You go again to a main inside place where other kind of activities are possible. So in this sense, I think to Mollino is very clear this social function of the theater.
Mm-hmm. You agree with that, Fulvio?
Yes, but this is because when Mollino is working, his work it's always perfect. So Mollino is not really thinking to people that will use his building in the way that we see today. Mollino was also projecting the parking outside of the Teatro Regio, and also was projecting how the traffic has to modificate in Piazza Castello, the square in which there is the theater. So the project of Mollino, it's the project of an engineer, but a special engineer that saw every kind of possibility to use his own work. So the building is a building with the hall that can be crossed by the car. So always Mollino is trying to solve every problem. After when he was almost dying, he projected for Fiat company the seat for 3,000 employees, and half of the project, we own one copy of the project, it's only concerning the problem of parking in meantime 3,000 Fiat cars at 9 in the morning.
So he was a perfectionist. Then
Absolutely.
I think it's time to talk about imperfection. And let's talk, instead of politics, about biopolitics, the politics of the body. What about Mollino and sexuality? Was Mollino, Fulvio, a homosexual? Was he interested in issues of transsexuality? Are there pictures of him dressing up like a butterfly or a bird or a woman?
So this is the first question that everybody would like to know. Was Mollino?
Was he interested? No, let's ask. Was he interested in sexuality?
I can say something that I have to tell before, because we found back 3 models that Mollino shooted in the 60s. In the 60s. So, speaking with one of these models, she was also filmed.
These are the female models who we saw in
models,
the... Okay,
yes,
right.
yes. She told us what she knew about the sexual aspect of the life of Mollino. And we understood that Mollino was really a very normal man, so he could have sex or not with this model, but we understood that Mollino was not at all interested really in sex. And this way that Mollino used photographing naked women and also dressing himself, I don't know how, is coming out because Mollino is always a man that is totally free. So in the 60s, the magazine Playboy was still sold in Italy in envelopes, or if you will receive this magazine with the post, was in envelope without any word Playboy, nothing. And Mollino was doing this photo, so that were really very strong in the period, exactly like the one of Jürgen Teller today. And he was making photo also, this kind of photo also for the greeting card for his friend at the end of the year. So it was, Mollino was totally outside of the consideration, I can do this, I can't do this, I have to be dressed in some way.
But it's interesting that the whole issue of gender, I mean, is treated with such a distance. I mean,
yes, sure.
Why is that? I mean, why is that treated with such a... I mean, one has much more to say in Italy about the sexuality of Federico Fellini, etc., than... I mean, Mollino is there. Why?
Yes.
Why? Is that because he's a half-god?
When we did the first catalog of the photography of Mollino, the Polaroids, this was 1985. Nobody knew the photography of Mollino, that was totally forgotten, because the last word of Mollino on the photography are written in the end of the 40s. So, one critic, photographic critic, Daniela Palazzoli, wrote that this work of Mollino with these naked women, at the end it's a little bit boring. And some other critics said that this work of Mollino looks like something that is repetitive, because there is no the reality in this. These photos are outside of the time. At the end, it was possible to understand why Mollino did so many photos, thousands of feminine portraits, through the work that we could do in Casa Mollino. And I mean, this work of Mollino, it's something that was a composition for himself, of his idea, was following a project that he had for his life, as I told you before. So it's impossible, looking to the Polaroids, to understand what they are.
Wilfried, when we commissioned Beatrice Colomina, who was very well known for her fantastic anthology about sexuality as space. I mean, she's a fantastic scholar on the sexual connotations of the architecture of Le Corbusier. She has also participated to this fantastic book published by Aaron Betsky about queer space. When we asked her, we had expected that Beatrice would address it, and she addresses it, but she says she disagrees with you, Fulvio. She says that Mollino's work is not at all about freedom. It's only about constraints. It's only about getting locked up and not being able to be a butterfly. Is that the way to see the gender aspect, Wilfried, of Carlo Mollino? How do you see that? Because I think the sexuality and the sexual expression of space, think about Mollino as the mirror man, think about his love for Ernst Lubitsch, or think about his admiration for films of Jean Cocteau, which we have interviews about, and I think there are traces also about. How do you see that, Wilfried? This connotation, sexual connotations in the work of Mollino, not just in the photographs, but also in the furniture, and of course in the sets, which are about the gaze, which are about voyeurism, and which are oft about a kind of a voyeurism of the self.
In fact, I think that's not at all clear, this whole thing, and that's why it's so difficult to talk about biography if we don't really go into a whole different research. I think that the camera, the photographic camera, is being used by Mollino for sure as a kind of a prothesis, as a kind of a bodily extension through which he interacts, for instance, with his models, but also with other things when he takes pictures. So there is the whole question that Colomina poses of him not living, but living vicariously through these women that he takes pictures, somehow identifying with the butterfly, wanting to be a woman, perhaps dressing up, creating some kind of different identities through role-playing in front of the mirror, as we might suggest when we see his interiors. And I find that there's an incredible camp aesthetic, really, in his 60s work, very close to Philip Johnson, for that matter, and in fact very gay, if you want. So this is one aspect that might be done some further research, and I would hope that this exhibition also opens a little bit with the catalog text, open this question. Now, of course, the whole issue is not a biographical issue in terms of a private thing, but we are interested in it, of course, in a much larger way as a part of his artistic life and his also political life, and we want to know about the constrictions and the freedom. And I would also challenge the idea that he was totally free. I would say he was, like Colomina is arguing, not so free, and I think it's also very difficult to be so free when you imagine the environment he grew up in, he lived in, working with his very Catholic father probably, and so on. So this is in Turin, being the only son between the 30s and the 50s. I mean, I know Italy now, I've been living there for more than 8 years. I have an idea that even today homosexuality is the worst that you could, the worst thing that could happen to you being Italian. And so it's really all the Italian gays I know live abroad, live in London or in Berlin. So I think that for that reason, maybe we should also be careful. And that's the freedom issue. The freedom issue, though, is abstract, because what is freedom? It's the desire to be free that is interesting here. It's the freedom he creates for himself through the role playing, maybe. And it's interesting that his politics or political aspects that you mentioned before, that were discussed here, somehow have a parallel to that, because he also there is kind of living camouflaged, and you don't really know what opinion he had, you don't know what sexuality had, you don't know his opinions in politics, you don't know his alignments or his because he's not part of any group, and he's also not at all a person of family. And that's in Italy highly untypical, because in Italy the whole social life is organized through families and clans and around these things. So for him, being a real loner and being really a total individualistic person in a way, we could look this as an experiment, or see this as an experiment, a self-experiment, very modern figure in that sense, a self-exploration, and then it might become a different thing. And then I would also again like to talk about the fact that his political nature has to be explored on that ground. We know for sure that architecture and revolution do not go together, and we know for sure there has never been a revolutionary architect. This is a basic problem, a fundamental problem, because architects work always for the power, and there is no architecture for the disempowered. So there is no architecture of revolution really, unless the revolution already has taken place and again becomes a glorification of the revolution. Then it's not revolution anymore. And so the architecture as a tool to change reality cannot be associated with revolution. So that's a basic problem that every architect knows, and that's also why there's so much skepticism, I think, versus architecture in general. Now we have the same debate today with Ramkola's building in China, and the whole question again, in Mies van der Rohe versus the Nazis, and so on. And now the thing about Mollino that is interesting is he has, if you read his texts, he has absolutely taken a distance to all powers. Left and right. I mean, he was not a church person, and he was not a communist in terms of party, and he was also not a fascist at all, and he was against every client, basically. This is also what Karl Rahmer really very much delivers, this idea, and I think it's interesting to see him struggle with every single client, because he does not want to get in the position of being dependent, which is very, very much the life of an architect every day, to feel this dependence also. And I find that interesting, because actually he creates the struggle of independence through his work, through certain ways he makes the project into something else than what has been expected. And he has done social housings, and he has also done very normal things, and the technique he developed, for instance, to make wood, to bend wood, is a cheap technique, it's not an expensive technique, versus the technique, for instance, that the Eames developed in America, which is an industrial technique, much more expensive. So I think that we should not put him in that drawer and say he is an elitist and he is only interested in the rich and so on, because that's what he is definitely not. If you look at the whole use he makes of cheap materials, of fake, of all these things, you see him also as a proto-pop artist, and that is something more close to Andy Warhol, I would say, in many aspects, than to any other artistic position.
He struggled with everything. Napoleone, did he struggle with his father? Because his father lived, until in the 50s, and his father was extremely rich, he was incredibly known. Was Mollino an unhappy child?
The father died in December 53, and the father was for sure very, very important for Mollino. All the interest of Mollino, ski, cars, planes are coming from the father, and especially from his father is coming this technical education, this very strong scientific education that Mollino has, really since he's drinking the milk when he was very young, but then it came out the fight, because Mollino, as you were saying, didn't like any order, and as I said before, followed a very, through surrealism, I think, which is coming from Freud discoveries of the unconscious, so trying to bring out a personal poetry and experience of the world, which the father did not
allow.
like.
Did Mollino actually wanted to have us explore his work? In the sense that, did he give some keys, or did he even, lock that up? Do you think that, he wrote his autobiography way before he ever died, but did he give some secret keys or puzzle? Was he concerned about the interpretation of his work? Was it important for him, the interpretation of his Polaroids with a naked woman? Was he interested in that we would discover later the butterflies? Do you really think so?
This is a very interesting point, I think, because on one side, being Mollino a surrealist, surrealist is coming, as I was saying, from Freud's discoveries, and is coming from the idea of the unconscious, something that is not rational, something that is not empirical, something that we cannot touch with our hand and see with our eyes. So, if you want, surrealists couldn't express themselves through rationality, through being too banal. So the fight is exactly here. I think that Mollino, as all of us probably, would have liked to be understood and would have liked that his work would have been also appreciated, for sure, but he could not explain, because he
could not explain.
Yes, his personal point of view is that if you explain something, then everything is lost. You have to be able to communicate through other senses, which is not rationality, so through sensuality, through poetry, and this is also one reason.
So he's completely different from people like Castiglione, people like Gioponti, people like Ettore Sozzas, completely different.
Well, no, completely different. No,
because you could say that they, like
is,
Enzo Mari especially, are pedagogues. They are teachers. He is not a teacher.
He's not a teacher. No, Mollino, in this regard, didn't want to make up a school, didn't want to teach anything. This is quite clear in him. This is something that he really stayed away from.
But he wanted to teach us something about butterflies, or not?
He wanted, well, of course, he wanted to express something which should not be seen as a teaching, but should be seen as something that we interpret. That's one reason why there are all different interpretations, because Mollino himself is opening, not giving a clear and closed definition of his work, but leaving it open, like in the surrealist culture.
Armin, what did Mollino want us to learn from Alpine architecture? You're a specialist in Alpine architecture. In 2006, you take a helicopter and you go to underneath the Matterhorn, and you go to photograph with Luciano Bolzoni. You go to photograph the cable station at Vurgen, and you photograph Alpine architecture almost for the whole of your career. There is even a project, which is a fantastic project, which is a film and this thing, which is called Alpi, Mountains. What did you learn from the Alpine vision, the Alpine architecture of Mollino? And did Mollino want us to learn something from these traditions?
Maybe I can start from this film project that actually was presented in 2005 in the Architecture Biennale as an installation now developed into this project. And this project started as a kind of bet with anthropologist Piero Zanini. And as I was photographing a lot of, let's say, infrastructural changements all around the world connected with transformation of globalization, Piero told me, well, you are going around all these places, and actually here, 60 kilometers from Milano, as I was living in Milano, the same transformations are happening, and in a certain way, the landscape of the Alps is connected with a certain cliché that is produced since 1850 with the invention of the tourism industry in the Alps, and this kind of cliché is kind of developing until now, and so also the idea that the artificial transformation of the Alps began in the 50s or 60s is not true, because it began much before. And what was important for me, to look at the Alps is how this landscape is not a natural landscape, but has been always, in a certain way, an artificial landscape, also with the agricultural use, for example. And what is very interesting in first, I come back. I think it's important to look now to get consciousness how this artificial image of naturality is created so that we get a conscience to think how a kind of sustainable development is possible. Because if we don't get the tools to understand how we create ourselves the social image of landscape and use of landscape, we cannot think which direction we want the use of the landscape.
I know, but is that also part of your fascination for the Alpine architecture of Mollino?
Now I come to the point, because I think what is great in Mollino is that he's not just putting a modernistic architecture in the landscape. Mm-hmm. If we look at Casa, he takes a traditional rural architecture, dismantle it, puts it on a pedestal as a kind of art sculpture, and in a certain way says the rural architecture is a kind of art. So it takes this richness of tradition and connects it then with a very modernistic or kind of airplane technology leather. Mm-hmm. So he connects two kinds of tradition, and I think this can be really an example of how to think the future, not just a simple, let's say, Green Party, we don't want modernism, but connecting two different aspects. And I think this is important for sustainability, because you cannot just say, we freeze everything, we don't want any kind of changements, because without changements, the nature in the Alps doesn't exist. It needs the man.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the oeuvre, the bodies of works of Mollino. Is it right to say that the one, not only, but the main trajectory, the main fil rouge in the work of Mollino is architecture, from the beginning to the end, with an exception of a period of about 10 years where he does not do architecture. And then, within that trajectory, there is a substrata, like a tunnel almost, tunnel vision, which is photography. And then he has these brief moments, like 3 years ski, 7 years cars, 15 years whatever, airplanes. His work seems an incredible net from very conscious decisions. Now the question is, does he get bored with cars? Does he get bored with airplanes? I mean, the constancy of architecture and photography is amazing. And then you have all these, Einstege ein, sozusagen. Wilfried.
Well, yeah, I'm not specialized in his biography, so I'm not the one to talk. But I think that the architecture really goes from 31 or 30 to 73, and that's a fact. And so more than 40 years of architecture, and he was trained in architecture. I think Schutter's convinced that he is an architect, even if he was, as Carlo Mollino said, rather lazy, and this laziness really made him free, as she argues, in terms of like the unconscious or whatever, being able to reach him, because he was not busying himself all day, organizing a studio, for instance, but having always collaborations and being rather aloof from the process, from the practical process. Now, I think that as an architect, he's particular. He's not the usual architect in terms of the modern architect. But maybe we could try to see all these other things he has done as part of his architecture. And I think this would actually help us to get away from looking at him as a kind of hobby pilot or hobby skier or hobby whatever of some kind of eccentric interest, but always looking at him as a kind of a dandy figure who is so well-to-do that he does what he wants because, the day is long and he has not much to do and he's lazy and so on. So I think that we could actually get to a point where we see this as a strategy. So then architecture is what he's doing, and all these other things, photography above all, help him be an architect, but a different architect from how architecture has been traditionally looked at. And I think this is the interesting moment. Can you actually see that the skiing and the flying in the air, which is drawing lines in the sky, so to speak, again, is the same way of doing choreographies that he does doing Teatro Regio and Lutrario and so on, or the Dragon? Can you actually see in the photo montage he does as a photographer the same kind of montage he does doing the Villa Garelli that Armin was just explaining, as a ready-made, shifting it from one place to another, making it into a building, not by invention but by relocalization. Can you think of these techniques as actually things that go together and that are not hobbies and versus architecture, but somehow they're part of his way of conceiving architecture? And Carlo Rama says that he would so much would have liked to be an actor and a ballerino, and I think this, and I would say Mimo, the one who's kind of doing these things. So I think that it's interesting to look at him in that sense as an actor, but as someone involving his own body, and this also being part of his architecture. And for us it's so interesting because the architecture he makes is always physical, is somehow connected to your physical experience. And I think that's something very rich, something very modernist also, and has to do with all these other things he does. And that's why I would like not to do the distinctions. And the exhibition really very much stresses this also, I think.
So
now,
they are intertwined. So
yes, of course you can have the different standpoint on this and make, and a little bit maybe you have one, because...
Do you have a different standpoint?
Because the books Fulvio has made are more made the way that you have the skier and the cars and so on, divided, and we took a different approach, but I think this could be challenged.
Fulvio. I have a totally different opinion.
Okay, let's hear it. Let's speak about it.
So Mollino started to study like an engineer. When the Faculty of Architecture was open, Mollino was invited to go in the Faculty of Architecture. That was considered at that point like a much more artistic way to be trained. Mollino was a son of an engineer, was himself an engineer, very able to make projects, as the beautiful drawings exhibited are showing. In his life, Mollino did 8 important buildings, some other around for friends, let's say with the left hand. He did 8 interiors, that's it. He wrote in his life 3 books. The most important is the photography book that you will see in the exhibition, Messaggio dalla Camera Oscura, very big book, very important. He wrote a second book on the ski technique, that is a very thick book, again, very important. The third one is on the architecture, very thin book, little size, you will see. So, when Mollino is speaking in this book, Architettura, Arte e Tecnica, he is saying exactly that. You can't be architectural critic following a straight line as usually it's done when you are looking to the architecture. Architecture, it's art. So architecture is one of the many possibilities of expression. And why today so many artists are interested in the Mollino work? They are not at all interested in the Mollino building. But what is the Mollino in some way lesson is that if you are an artist, but I am speaking about art, not about today the art market that is totally different. If you are an artist, you will capture everybody that is able to go in the depth of the life of the man and to be, commosso. Moved, exactly, moved. So Mollino is a man that is able to move us. So architects are looking to Mollino, artists are looking to Mollino, photographers are looking to Mollino. We have in Casa Mollino 90% of the visitors that are coming from all over the world. We are not at all known in Torino. We never publish our address in Torino. Nobody knows in Torino where we are. 90% of the people it's involved in the contemporary art, and are very few the architects that are looking to Mollino, because Mollino never did a school, his own school, because art can't be explained art can't be passed to some other person. Everybody has to express himself. And Mollino was fantastically expressing himself through aerial acrobacy, a masterpiece. That is a letter of a friend of Mollino that said, I saw a plane in the sky and the acrobacy was perfect. Only you could be the pilot of the plane. So when he's designing the racing car, he's designing the racing car for the most difficult race in the world, 24 hours of Le Mans. So
but the car stopped after 2 rounds, so it didn't matter. I mean, it was not that all perfect, that Le Mans.
No, because this it's something that we know, but the legend is always going on. Mm-hmm. The racing car in 24 hours of Le Mans should be cars produced by company, not unique pieces, not strange demonstrations. So the Mollino car has only 1 seat, so it was not possible to run. So when Mollino understood that this was really impossible, they cut part of the structure of the car and they pushed a 2nd seat. So Mollino was able to participate to the run. But when this famous Jaguar was very close to the Bisiluro of Mollino, probably the driver, that was not Mollino, did a little bit too, come si dice?
Steering wheel.
Yes. He moved too much the steering wheels and the car goes out of the street. But this was not...
sounds like a film, no?
Yes.
Life is like a movie set. Armin, why are contemporary artists so interested in Mollino?
Yeah, maybe I wanted to ask maybe a question. So, is that there is a big attention on other themes and not on the architecture because there is no cultural mediation on the architecture? Because, for example, of course, we know that in Italy, public cultural structures have already a lot of work with the long history of ancient art. But there is a cultural mediation on, for example, design, also because there is an art market connected to this design. And the problem is that there is no market for the architecture. So there is no cultural mediation, and if without cultural mediation there is no information, and so there is no attention. I mean, this is a little bit the problem also, maybe. And the question was?
The question is, why do you think that so many of your colleagues, contemporary artists, we have 2 of them in the show, Simon Starling, Nari Bahamian, who started years ago, actually Nari in 1989, to be fascinated, interested in Mollino. I think about Stephen Claydon, Matou Perret, John Armleder, name it. I mean, these people are all interested in Mollino. Why is that? Because they are envious, they are jealous of designers, of architects, because a lot of contemporary artists want to do everything. They imitate design, they imitate architecture, they are pseudo-sociologists, pseudo this and pseudo that. I mean, they absorb everything without giving back. Is Mollino part of that big sponge?
Well, I think that again it's because the work of Mollino has so many layers that are interesting, from the way objects are produced, so that he involves both artisanal, traditional, and new, very contemporary production methods. That the different objects can live on different scales. So it's very nice to see the work of Simon Starling, where the chair gets almost to be an architecture or a kind of spaceship in space. So he uses the techniques of science fiction movies. So this chair is out of scale in not only in space but also in time. We have a kind of traditional objects constructed with artisanal methods that gets to be a sculpture. And I think maybe that also these biomorphical, very artisanal constructions are now so interesting because since a few years we have the possibility to print objects in 3D, which is so these very unique objects are creating a kind of contrast with our new conceptual possibility of multiplication of unique objects.
What is your favorite moment in this exhibition?
Well, I think what the favorite thing is that going through the 3 rooms, you have different way. It's like 3 acts, and I hope that the public has 3 possibilities, different possibilities to interact with the objects, and create his own narration. And each of the rooms has its own kind of script to interact. So
Napoleone, what is your favorite moment in the exhibition, except for your own room, the Casa Mollino, photographed by Armin? You are not allowed to talk about that one.
I'm too corrupted, I think. I know too much Mollino, I know all the photos, the drawings. For me, it was a little emotion, very briefly, really, and this was really the thing that moved me more to see the exhibition, to see these little 3 chairs that we discovered for the first time in Australia. And
I mean, there are
really
3
curious.
chairs coming from Australia, and you thought, where are these chairs?
Yeah, we're lost. By chance, we found it 1 year ago, more or less, and we are grateful to Haus, Kunst and Chris that they brought them here. But I mean, I was really anxious to see these objects because for me, it's I don't know, a passion. So,
So for Armin, it's these moments of scripting, let's say, in the exhibition. For you, it's the 3 chairs. Fulvio, what is your favorite moment in the exhibition?
Something that I like very much are the Mollino drawings that Wilfried chose in a lot. But what I like it's the projection of the photo of Casa Mollino. And what I think is that this project is so depth that Armin, with an invention, exhibited the Casa Mollino, but without pushing his finger inside. So in the exhibition there is this, I don't know, this curiosity to see or to understand something more. Because if you are in front of a drawing, you can see what it is. It's a project for an house or what it is. I don't know. If you are in front of a chair, you know what it is. It's an expression. So it can't be done in a serie because it's an artwork. But in front of this photo that Armin did in Casa Mollino, in which there are no Mollino furnitures, in which there are tiles, there are, I don't know, object or furniture designed by other architects, engraving, you can't understand. So I think that this is a strong point that should move the curiosity of the people.
Wilfried, last question, last word. Why do you think one should come and see this exhibition?
Wow. Before I answer, I will pick up on one thing that Armin said before. The architecture, the fact that the architecture is so difficult to exhibit generally, or also to market and to marketing, so to speak. The whole issue of diffusing architecture and making it something that people actually want and appreciate historically has maybe not only to do with the fact that you cannot move it so easily. This is one aspect, because markets like things that move, because that way they can be sold and resold again. But architecture has also one strange characteristic, and that it's being used. You can get a chair and put it in a museum, but you cannot put a building in a museum in terms of not using it unless you decide not to use it anymore, like a ruin or like a building that has lost all its function, like a temple or Parthenon. We would just visit for what it is. And in a way, Mollino's works are already at that point, because if you go to Lago Nero, it's completely useless now. So they are actually already museums of themselves, but it would keep an enormous now amount of effort to keep them somehow intact, to renovate them all the time, without damaging the patina and everything, because that's then again a way of destroying the history of it, and still not using it, because people like to then, politicians like to make use of buildings, and then they give the money to restore them and so on. And I think this is a general problem of architecture, and maybe we made this exhibition also, and there I come to your question, because we thought that the architecture here has to be shown and be reevaluated and looked at with opening questions, not answers, not giving answers, in a fresh way, showing that the architecture, design, photography and so on, as I said, are one, and so that we should not forget the architecture while facing so much of these furnitures around, which are really very beautiful and I believe might be worth 3 million, but I think at the same time there's no proportion between this kind of market height of the furniture and the total, let's say, I don't know how to say it really, but it's a ruin basically that we see of the architecture.
But Wilfried, Christie's and Sotheby's are starting to put up entire buildings on auction. I mean, there is one building which is still almost perfect, which is the Villa Agra. I mean, do you think that Sotheby's and Christie's will auction it off and sell it to you too, to Bono?
No, the point is really exactly that. There are buildings like Prouvé's building that was sold over through an auction house, and Philip Johnson also had one of his buildings in the auction. And that's true, it's happening, and we have seen Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House being resold to Colombo and again. So there are architecture collectors, but they're very few. And the point is with Mollino here that, of course, this kind of architecture for the moment has absolutely no market at all. It's much too, has no, and it's not of any interest to this market that you are pointing at. And it's much too secretive also in a way. So I think that Agra now, which is for sale, and this is now the important point, it's the last example of a perfect interior-exterior continuum still existing in the family in the third generation. And we have these beautiful videos of Armin and Armin also using recycling Super 8 films of the family themselves from the 60s. So that you see actually a building in use by a family in the third generation now. This whole thing is still intact. They still use it, but they want to sell because it's too difficult to keep it up like this. It's like you become a museum. Now they do not want to sell it at the auction, and they do not want to sell it to anyone, because what would anyone do? Take out the furniture, sell it, and then that's it. So the point is, the house with the furniture is worth less than the furniture itself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
So you need a public institution or a foundation
to
go for it. And who in Italy, looking at public institutions and foundations, would be able to do that? It's impossible.
It's almost impossible.
That's why it's a problem. We would need foundations like CCA in Canada also to get good going on this.
But the Italians sell their archives right now to the CCA, the Centre Culturel d'Architecture, Centre d'Architecture Contemporaine Montréal, which is founded by Phyllis Lambert, millionaire, whiskey, Canadian whiskey. And she, they buy all these things, these archives. Fulvio, very last question. When Carlo Mollino would have heard tonight these comments, and especially the story about Villa Agra, and I happen to know, by the way, that Bono is really interested in Villa Agra. when Carlo Mollino would have heard this, would he have been laughing in his graveyard, in his tomb? Because, funnily enough, I never saw a picture of Mollino laughing.
Yes, it was...
There was a picture of him laughing?
No, but Mollino was also singing and playing guitar.
I'm asking about laughing. I'm asking about laughing.
We have to rewrite history now.
I'm asking about laughing. I mean, think about Freud, I'm asking about laughing. Is there a picture of him laughing?
I don't think so. Napoleone? I don't think so.
No.
Okay, then
very controlled.
We are all going to laugh tonight, okay? We're going to have a drink in the Golden Bar and you can continue to talk. Danke, vielen Dank, meine Damen und Herren, dass Sie hier waren und herzlichen Dank an Armin Linke, Fulvio Ferrari, Wilfried Kühn and Napoleone Ferrari. And a special thanks to our dear colleagues here, because without you, no Carlo Mollino in Monaco di Baviera. Thank you.